Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it's Robservations, the show about something on a Sunday, ladies and gentlemen. You know what? To be honest, I was gloating about the Seahawks. It was 24-0 against the poor Atlanta Falcons, and then they rallied. You know what? It was 27-17 when I last looked, Seahawks, but there's less than 2 minutes remaining in the game. So I figured, you know what? The Seahawks are probably going to win this one. Thank God. Let's hear it for the Jedi Knights of the Pacific Northwest. Once again, remember, this is Robservations, a show about something. Robservations number 261 for you imagination connoisseurs, you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. And there's a lot to talk about today, ladies and gentlemen, a lot to talk about. But first, as you all know, this show is brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and you punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, you get 20% off of your order. Isn't that cool? Anyway, guys, gals, gentle beings, people from all over the universe, I'll tell you, what's it all about today? I'll tell you what it's all about today. It is all about today, as I always barely make it onto this show because I always jump out of the shower, and I'm always hot. Today's show has to address Joker. Joker, ladies and gentlemen, has now become the highest grossing R-rated film. It did a little bit earlier in the week. It's the top grossing R-rated film ever. And I'd like to read a little article that dropped on Deadline this morning at 11 a.m., 2 hours ago. Joker laughing at 850 million worldwide as Maleficent 2 nears 300 million and Terminator Dark Fate unlucky with only $13 million in its off-seas bow. This article is about the international box office, and it is written by Nancy Tartaglione. And this was a very busy weekend at the international box office with the sophomore session of Disney's Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, seeing a 43% drop, which is pretty good, to lead Studio Pictures at $64.3 million in 100% of its offshore footprint. Behind the sorceress, Warner Brothers Village Roadshow, Braun Studios' Joker continued its laugh-a-minute run to add $47.8 million, just 38% off the previous weekend, which is a huge, I mean, that's staying power, ladies and gentlemen. That is staying power. Becoming the number 3 biggest DC movie ever overseas with $571.5 million to date for a total global cum of $849.1 million global, where it is also the top grossing R-rated movie ever at current rates and the first to cross the 8th century, meaning $800 million mark. But leading all offshore play is China's Better Days at an estimated $85 million. This is particularly notable since the film had been a casualty of censorship crackdown earlier this summer and had only a 3-day heads up for its local distributor. Terminator Dark Fate sealed $12.8 million in its early debuts. These include France, Germany, and the UK, along with Belgium, Switzerland, Austria, Sweden, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore. The Paramount Skydance pick is released overseas by Disney and jumped on some offshore markets to capitalize on the upcoming holidays. The wider release is the next session with Japan, Taiwan, and Poland. The early result on the Linda Hamilton star is lower than might have been hoped, but there are holidays coming up in the key markets that bowed this frame. Joker is also simply a wild card and is still pulling remarkable numbers in Europe. Next week, when Joker may or clearly may not have played out its hand. Oh, really? Are you going to do this again? 2 shows in a row? Really? Are you going to do that again? You're going to bark again? You always do that. Anyway, staggering success for Joker. And what's really interesting about that kind of success, every studio dreams about movies that make $750 million. But like Deadpool, what's really significant about Joker is not its R rating, but how much they spent to make the film. By all reports I have read, the nearest I can figure is they spent about $63 million to produce the film, and the money they spent on marketing is around $100 million. So that is a total spend for the studio, obviously, of $160+ million, which in this day and age is not very much money. And as Joker makes $850 million, usually the old model was that a movie had to gross 3 times what it cost and what they spent on marketing to make the movie profitable, which means, of course, that let's say after 450, 460, 480 plus million dollars, we're looking at profit, which means Joker could be very possibly not just one of the most profitable comic book movies ever made, but one of the most profitable movies ever made. Certainly one of the most profitable movies in the last 25 years for a studio. Now, this is amazing, and this is great for the industry. But what lessons can be taken away from such astonishing success? And I'll tell you, first of all, you cannot say suddenly that, oh, see, this movie proves that mid-level or mid-budgeted adult fare does have a place in multiplexes. You can't just say that, because first and foremost, Joker is about the Joker, or an incarnation of the Joker. And of course, Batman, whether you like Ben Affleck's movies or not, whether you like Batman v Superman, whether you like Justice League, whether you like Suicide Squad, and then the 3 Nolan films have always proven that Batman is pretty much gold at the box office. Yes, I understand that Justice League was not the hit it should have been, but that's another story entirely. But Batman is a very viable, I mean, remember, Suicide Squad, Harley Quinn, these are Bat characters. So the Bat universe, if it's held in capable hands, is usually profitable in some way, shape, or form, depending on who's making the movies. Of course, they have to still be good. That said, Joker is it's a zeitgeist film. It's really tapping into, people were afraid that it was going to cause incel violence, whatever that is. But I think the Joker, the overarching idea of the Joker, it deals with the unfair income inequality. It deals with the for-profit healthcare crisis that we have in this country. It truly is a zeitgeist movie. It's truly a button-pushing movie. And I think people are going back. I didn't know when I first saw it whether it would have this kind of resounding success, because it's a bummer. It doesn't exactly leave you with a big smile on your face once you've seen it. If anything, it makes you want to take a shower, but it also makes you think. And what it shows is, in this world of, one of the things that's happening in the entertainment industry, in the movie industry, that cannot be underestimated, is the fact that, yes, we have streaming services, but the business model for streaming services is very different. Gilbert is here, is very different from what the studios are doing theatrically. So the thing about Netflix is, we always make fun of the fact that Netflix doesn't promote their movies. You never know whether or not they're actually on, what's happening. The wonderful Dolomite Is My Name that Craig Brewer directed, that stars, of course, Eddie Murphy as Rudy Ray Moore and Wesley Snipes. It's funny, wonderful film. It's a wonderful movie. I thought it was very delightful. It should be playing on an endless loop with Ed Wood now and forever, Tim Burton's Ed Wood. I thought it was great. I thought the performances were great. It's so much fun. It's such a breezy movie. It didn't feel like it was 2 hours at all. I didn't want it to end. I wanted it to go on because, Rudy Ray Moore didn't just make Dolomite. Dolomite obviously returned in The Human Tornado. As he says, he has a dong as big as King Kong. If you ever want to see fun stuff, don't just watch Dolomite, but the trailers that Embassy Pictures did back in the day, the trailers for these movies were terrific. Also, it reminded me of the fact I was a blaxploitation fan growing up, and the character, the actor Mr. Martin, that Wesley Snipes plays in Dolomite. He directed that film, but he was also in movies like Rosemary's Baby. But he starred in one of my favorite blaxploitation movies that nowadays I can't even say the name of the movie. I tweeted this out, but he co-stars with Fred Williamson in a film that was actually directed by Jack Arnold, who directed It Came From Beyond Space and directed the original Creature from the Black Lagoon. And it is a movie called Boss N-Word. That's the movie. Same distribution company. I think it might have released that movie the same year that Embassy was it. I think it was Embassy that released those movies in the same year. Well, it's basically a riff on the Man with No Name movies, really. And Jack Arnold directing, Fred Williamson, and it's you got to check it out. At least look at the trailer on YouTube. It's Boss N-word. It's a Western. And it's basically about, well, you just got to watch it. And I guarantee you when you watch the trailer, you'll be like, I got to see that movie. But I really loved Dolomite Is My Name. I thought it was a terrific film. Really, really great stuff. And definitely check it out. But the difference in a movie like Dolomite Is My Name as opposed to, say, Joker is once Netflix pays for Dolomite Is My Name, or whether they acquire something, they buy a movie outright, their economic model is very different from a studio's model. Because what happens is they make their money through their subscriptions, and they have to keep their subscriptions will eventually plateau, but then they have to keep those subscriptions coming in. And so what happens is Netflix is in debt, and who knows if they'll ever get out of debt. They're getting $2 billion more. They're borrowing $2 million more dollars. And the difference is between a movie like Joker is obviously Joker has to perform at the box office. Well, Dolomite Is My Name. Sure, they want it. They want views. And they just talked about how El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie, had 25 million views over the first week that it was out. Now that's a huge number of people to watch one program. So in terms of, and again, I don't know their exact economic model because they haven't released how much each movie means to them. But what happens is, it's what's called the long tail. You get a lot of views up front and then it tapers off, and then people will watch El Camino forever. And so they're not reliant upon box office dollars, but the major studios are. And what's happening with the major studios is they have to show a return on their investment. So when they spend $150 million, including marketing, you're talking 65, let's just say 65 million, a little bit more than it probably cost. So it's $165 million spend for Joker. Now, they know anybody behind Joker is going to know that because it's connected to the Batman franchise, it's probably a good bet that a movie is at least going to break even globally. That's what they're hoping. So it's not, that is something that I'm sure the marketing department could speak to and go, if we make a Joker, the analytics are that it's probably going to break even if we can keep that spend below a certain number. Now, I don't care who you are. Maybe if you're Walter Hamada, you can say, I thought about this. Nobody, no punditry, no executive, nobody in the hallowed halls of Warner Brothers ever thought for a minute that Joker, Todd Phillips' Joker, his incarnation, the Joker that apparently originated as a Martin Scorsese project himself, nobody could have ever predicted the wild success of the Joker. This is an anomaly. And as much analytics as you're running, and you can look at it against any other comic book movie, especially about villains, which there really aren't any. You could say Suicide Squad, I guess, but nothing like this. This success is truly unprecedented, and it is wildly profitable. Wildly profitable. Now, for a studio, this is the economic model that they should be looking at. Now everybody's going to say, it's not about... See, here's Warner Brothers. I love Warner Brothers because I started working there. I began my career, as I've said before, working for Bill Young, who was at the time the senior vice president of physical production at Warner Brothers. So I was at Warner Brothers for 2 years, working as basically a management trainee, which was a glorified PA, but I was working at the highest echelon of the studio. And I was I had an office in the executive wing. I was literally in and out of everyone's office. And at the time, Mark Canton and Bob Daly ran the studio. I was in their office every day. Actually, Bob Daly and Terry Semmel ran the studio, and Mark Canton, they were head of Warner Brothers, but Mark Canton ran the studio. And I was in their offices every day, bringing paperwork, basically. but it was still interesting. And nobody, I can guarantee you, predicted this kind of success. It's amazing. So what can we learn from this? The lesson here, at least in my estimation, is not that suddenly you should be scouring DC Comics and finding every single villain and trying to make a movie like this, because you can't. Joker is a unique character, a unique villain. You might be able to get away with a Lex Luthor movie, something like this, maybe, but I doubt it. I think it's unique. However, what I think is more interesting is that this kind of edgy fare, this very adult-oriented, R-rated, dealing with issues of the day, this kind of film is viable in the marketplace. And rather that studios, you look at like a Men in Black International. I do not know how much Men in Black International cost, but this model lately has been, we're swinging for the fences with franchise properties. That's what people want. And as I've always maintained forever, what people really want are great films. They want great characters and they want great stories. They don't necessarily care that they came from a shared cinematic universe or a comic book universe at all. Great characters and great stories. Franchise property is great. I love franchise properties as much as the next person. But using that as a business model is not sustainable. How many times have we lost out? Everyone's like, oh, Men in Black International didn't work. Everyone's pointing their fingers. I mean, I would say, really? Was that really the most creative use? You're paying very expensive executives that have Ivy League educations, Ivy League business degrees, and they came up with the idea of making Men in Black International. Again, it's a spreadsheet movie. Obviously, these actors are doing well in Marvel movies and other films. So let's bring back one of our moribund franchises, re-inject new blood into it. And of course, it's going to make money. How didn't that work with the female Ghostbusters? Look, the female Ghostbusters did not work very well because it had an all-female cast. It didn't. The problem with that movie was it was a retread of very familiar ground, and it wasn't what people wanted to see. And ultimately, movies are successful because it's what people want to see. What people want are great stories well told. And the fact that the Joker took a familiar character that we've been seeing portrayed in the media since the 60s with Cesar Romero, and probably even before that if you look at animated shows, but the Joker has been in the cultural zeitgeist both for kids and adults for a very, very long time. So it's not a stretch to think that a really compelling Joker movie could make a lot of money. However, the fusion of the content with the character was very audacious. And it was something that I am sure, I don't care, I'm sure all the executives want to take credit for it, but how many executives within the hallowed halls of Warner Brothers poo-pooed this movie? Said this is never going to work. Todd Phillips, he made a lot of money for Warner Brothers with the Hangover movies. Whatever you think of the sequels, they did some good business. So he's a director that Warner Brothers they like working with directors they've worked with in the past, as long as they have good relationships and their movies made money. But this Todd Phillips project was by no means a sure thing. It was by no means a profitable thing. It was definitely something that could break even. And at the rate Warner Brothers had been going, that's pretty good, But what needs to happen, I think what has to happen at the studio level, the movies they're making are unsustainable. They're because streaming services, they don't have to recoup their money. They build that into whatever their streaming model is. Something like The Irishman, I don't know if Netflix will ever recoup from that. But these streaming services, the reason they're able to buy these movies is that they're just feeding. One thing is no different than another as far as the streaming service is concerned. Once you've played it out, once you've dropped your Stranger Things, once you've dropped your El Camino, once you've dropped whatever that's making, you get a ton of views up front, and then it'll earn forever. It just becomes another can on the grocery store shelf. So, not true of a studio movie. Studio movie has to earn. It has to earn when it comes out. And the ancillary markets, it'll never, you got to roar out of the gate if you're a studio movie. And the problem is we're running out of studios. We're running out of studios, and the amount of money, studios don't just have vaults of cash. They are borrowing money. They are leveraging things. They're teaming up with foreign entities to pay for movies because they cost so much. So the studios themselves, remember, there's multiple studios or multiple financial entities that have a taste of all of these movies. So all of this money is not just going back into the Warner Brothers coffers. This money is it's being spread around. And our studios, all the studios, with the exception of Disney this year, we'll see where Disney is next year. Disney is pretty much bulletproof. Universal's not doing pretty badly either. Warner Brothers, however, and Paramount, poor Paramount had two movies they had very high hopes for. Jim Giannopoulos is the head of Paramount, and he's very well regarded in the industry. Paramount has Terminator Dark Fate, and they have, which opened sort of really underperformed overseas. They expected where traditionally they would have big numbers expected on this movie. Same with Gemini Man. Both Gemini Man and Dark Fate are not doing well, which is it's too bad for Paramount. Paramount really has nothing. How long are these studios going to last? The business is it's changing so rapidly. But I think the idea behind Joker is you don't have to spend $150 million or $200 million. And think about how that exponentially changes how much a movie has to earn. You have a $200 million movie. Are you going to spend only $100 million? Let's say you spend $150 million. So then, you're up to $350 million of a spend. And look at how much money you have to make back for it to be profitable. 3 times what you spent. Well, look at where you're at. No wonder everybody's chasing $1 billion now. Well, this is an unsustainable business model. Joker, now, I don't think there's any magic button you can push to make a $55 or $60 million or $65 million movie profitable. And what's really interesting is a lot of success stories, especially from Warner Brothers, all the way back 20 years, The Matrix was a $65 million film, became wildly successful. Not as successful as Joker, but pretty damn successful. And that's, I think, where the industry personally should shift. You've got to work harder. The people, the Ivy League educated business people, they've got to know more. They've got to be more up on what's going on. The studio executives can no longer rest on their laurels. They can't just read coverage and take meeting after meeting. There's got to be people. Basically, you need to start hiring Kevin Feige's at the studios who know how to make films and who are not just executives with an Ivy League business degree. You have to start hiring people that know how to, or know which films to make and know how to make those films for a price. Otherwise, the studio system is going to collapse. We're going to lose Paramount. We could lose Sony. How long until we lose Warner Brothers? I mean, it would be really sad. We lose Fox already. Everyone's talking about their films being put on moratorium. I don't know where that's going to be. I don't know what's going to happen with all of that. But the fact is, making a $65 million film like Joker that can perform like Joker, I mean, that's the real trick. It's really easy for me to sit here and armchair quarterback. But you know what? It can be done. It's been done in the past. It's going to be done in the future. And I think the studios have to move away. But you could also say that, look, Joker is a franchise movie. Joker is part of the franchise. It's part of the Batman franchise. Whether you want to say it's a standalone movie or not, it is a DC Comics film. And you made it for $65 million. Why can't they do a lot of that? Maybe Birds of Prey is along those same lines. I'm not that impressed by what I've seen from it so far, but maybe it'll be good. I mean, if you start making comic book movies and bring them back and have auteur directors keep the budgets down. I mean, it's not like Joker was heavily dependent on people flying around. There was more effects in it than you might think, but still pretty interesting what they've done with Joker. And I see it as a good sustainable model. I know that Greg Berlanti at one point, a friend of mine, was writing a Booster Gold script for him. What if you could make a Booster Gold movie for $50 million or $60 million? I mean, Shazam apparently cost $100, but what if you were able to make Shazam for $65 million? It certainly would have been more profitable than it is. And I don't know. We'll see. But I think the lesson to be learned from Joker is that there is Obviously, it wasn't just comic book fans going to see Joker. It became a zeitgeist movie. All kinds of people went out and saw it. That's what the studios have to be concentrating on. How can we pull back our business, make franchise pictures, make movies that are aimed at adults, R-rated perhaps, that only cost $65 million? How do you do that? Well, you've got to figure out how to do it, because if you don't, the model for the studios that they're following now is not going to be sustainable. It's just not going to be sustainable. I mean, can you imagine if you had 4 or 5 movies like Joker bolstering a studio? I mean, I'm not saying that that's easy to do. I mean, it's easy for me to say it, but it's got to be where the business is going to go. Otherwise, we're going to lose our studios. I don't want to see Warner Brothers go away. I love Warner Brothers. I don't want to see Paramount go away. I don't want to see Sony. I'd love somebody. I mean, if Sony gets out and it goes back to being Columbia, still the logo's still there, but I'd love to see that happen. We'll see. We'll see where it's all going to go. But it's all very interesting, and kudos to everybody. Kudos for Warner Brothers. I mean, look, say what you want. They took the chance. Somebody greenlit it. Walter Hamada greenlit it. He's laughing all the way to the bank. We shall see. We shall see. Emil Johansson is here. He says, Emil Johansson says, is Palpatine Anakin's father? Well, you know what? I am going to put, I know I talk about spoilers all the time, but there's some guys I like. They have another YouTube channel that I enjoy, and they're called The Popcast. They did a theory video that they dropped 2 days ago about that very thing. Is Palpatine Anakin's father? I think that would actually be pretty cool if he was. Here, I'm putting this in the chat, the live chat. If you don't want spoilers about the Rise of Skywalker, don't watch this. But I will tell you that the guys at the Popcast, they did a great video about what they think is going on in the Picard series. Their videos, at least their Picard video and this video, is more well-researched and posits a really interesting theory. If they are correct, even if they're 50% correct, well, J.J. Abrams might have redeemed the entire sequel trilogy. I don't have that kind of faith in J.J. Abrams. It seems to me that this would require too much research on his part. I just don't believe that Hollywood screenwriters would put as much effort into what the Popcast guys came up with. And I don't love all of it. I don't love what they came up with Vader's helmet, but you never know. It's a good thing, but I think that they do posit, and the idea that Palpatine is Anakin's father, that Palpatine has been playing a long game and manipulating bloodlines, and they also posit that Rey is a clone using both Anakin and Palpatine's own DNA, which I tend to kind of agree with. Alexander Wilson is here. Alexander Wilson says, the Joker is going to outgross Batman and Superman, which tells you how big of a failure it was. Also, good word of mouth is very important. I totally agree with that, but Batman v Superman, I don't think it still made a great deal of money. I mean, it didn't quite get to $1 billion, but the problem with Batman v Superman is it cost so much money. I've heard as much as $450 million was spent on the movie and marketing, which means they had to get deep past $1 billion to be profitable, and they just aren't. And that's definitely problematic. So I don't think Batman v Superman certainly wasn't a disaster, but with the amount of money that they spent on it, definitely a disappointment. And good word of mouth is very important. You still have to make a good movie. And as I said, Joker has become a zeitgeist film. People are talking about it. They're talking about, what does it mean to them? What does it mean to our culture? What does it have to say about America? I think that's why it's also doing well overseas. They look at Joker and everybody gets to go, America's not as great as it thinks it is. Timbula the Spider Monkey is here. Timbula says, speaking of Dolomite is my name, what is your favorite Rudy Ray Moore film? I love Disco Godfather. Bucky, what have you done yourself? Disco Godfather's great. I think Disco Godfather, isn't Disco Godfather a Dolomite movie? It's the third movie. I think it is, right? It's Dolomite, and then it's Human Tornado, and then it's Disco Godfather. Maybe I'm wrong, but Disco Godfather is great. I love all these movies, and I grew up watching them, and they were not just grindhouse movies in the theater, but they were also grindhouse videotapes. You get them and watch them. It's funny when the reason that I sought out the first time I heard of there was a tape a tape of trailers, and I don't know if, well, hey, let me check. What's so great is we have this newfangled thing called the internet, but there was a tape of trailers called The Best of Sex and Violence, and it was hosted by John Carradine. And let me see, I'm going to look this up. I haven't thought about this in a long time. Okay. The Best of Sex and Violence, 1982. This tape is a compilation of scenes from previews from various exploitation movies. And let's see. I think I want to say that David Carradine was in it, but I want to say that Charlie Band produced it. There's not a whole lot of information here, but that's where the trailers for Dolomite and Disco Godfather and Human Tornado were on there, along with like the Doberman Gang and the Twilight People. I mean, really 70s grindhouse. And then they just put this tape out. I watched this tape a million times, and I loved it. God, 82. Those were the days. But yes, and I used to put the when I would do mixtapes back in the early 80s, when I was very into 12 inches. I was into 12-inch remix, a 12-inch remix vinyl of my favorite songs. Things like New Order and Depeche Mode and Prince. I was a big Prince remix fanatic. You had to have the 20-minute version of America. You had to have the long version of She's Always in My Hair or Erotic City, not the single versions. And they were important. This was important. But between when I'd make mixtapes for people of remixes, I would put clips from movies and things in between, and I would mix in. I used a lot of the Human Tornado and Disco Godfather trailers in my mixtapes. Alexander Wilson says Warner Brothers isn't going anywhere. It's one of AT&T's best performing divisions. Look at DirecTV and Uverse. Those two are losing crazy money. Well, I'm not saying Warner Brothers. I mean the studio itself. The studio, Warner Brothers will exist in some way, shape, or form because it's a big company. But in terms of the studio, what it's doing and how it's doing its business could always go away, and the less profitable divisions will be cut out. But that's why streaming services. I mean, look, if Warner Brothers turns into a streaming service, maybe it's just going to be HBO Max forever. You don't know. But I would hope not. I don't want it to go away. But I'm just saying, with the streaming model, it's just a different economic model, and the studio model is, it's on borrowed time. If it keeps trying to work the way it has been working. Stubble McShave says Prime will have all the non-Craig Bond films in November. Well, that's pretty cool. I like that. All of the non-Craig Bond films. So we get all the Bond films up to 2006, all the way through Die Another Day. But I own all the Bond films on Blu-ray. And I haven't picked up the 4K Daniel Craig set, but, I want to get all the Bond films on Blu-ray, obviously. But we shall see how that goes. But that's cool. Having them on streaming, you can just click through them and watch your favorite scenes. I do like that. Mark Chure says, I'm doing a Burt Reynolds double feature with White Lightning and its sequel, Gator. Your thoughts on these movies? I used to have a 40 by 60. I had a 40 by 60 for Gator, the poster. I love White Lightning and Gator. And again, they're not blaxploitation movies, but it's that same kind of early 70s drive-in action. They became a little bit more respectable when movies like White Lightning and Gator turned into Smokey and the Bandit, but they're a lot of fun. Burt Reynolds had a really interesting career jumping between those movies and going into things like, are you going to really bark at me now again? I don't know what has gotten into Gilbert. I think he really wants me to just go out and play with him. We did take him to the dog park last night, and he did get to run around. but I don't know what you want. I think he's just lonely. I mean, he's got Tallulah. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of Gator and White Lightning. I would recommend them both. But again, it's from a forgotten era. It's all of these movies that I like when I grew up, whether it's James Glickenhaus's movies, and those were early 80s, like The Exterminator and Soldier. But I did like White Lightning and Gator because you'd catch them on TV or on cable, and people just don't see them anymore. They're not seen, because nowadays when you've got movies like, whether it's the Fast and the Furious franchise, or even like you look at Hobbs and Shaw, which is part of that franchise, obviously. I mean, the action is so over the top, but there was great car chases where there was a joy in that. You watch Dolomite Is My Name and you realize that the car, I think though, in Dolomite Is My Name, there are scenes that are in The Human Tornado as well. They combined both Dolomite and The Human Tornado into as one movie, and that's fine with me. It didn't bother me, but they show a car chase being filmed, and they shot it like you see it exactly as it's in the finished film. They do a really good job there's more coverage. You see more coverage in the actual movie, like you see the intercuts between the camera angles. But even watching Rudy Ray Moore in the back seat of a car being chased by one police car, I mean, there was even in that movie there you see, you don't need all the histrionics and all the effects and everything. Sometimes a good car chase can just be two cars, even in a movie like Dolomite or The Human Tornado. But yes, I think everybody should watch White Lightning and Gator, because why not? Because you'll have fun watching them. Because they're hilarious and they're fun. But those movies are cool. Gator and White Lightning are cool. I like those movies. Alexander Wilson says, being part of the Black community, Watchmen is catching on like wildfire among the community. I believe the show's ratings will shoot up from here. Well, it's really interesting. I would have certainly, expected that after how many franchise TV shows would open with a scene depicting what happened in 1921 in Oklahoma during the Black Wall Street riots, massacre, whatever you want to call it? Not many. So I would assume, and by the way, Regina King, man, talk about a strong Black woman kicking some ass. Man, does she look good. And I would imagine so. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes. And on one hand, isn't that a good thing? I mean, as much as I might sit there and go, why is this a sequel to Watchmen? Or where are you taking this? Are they going to pull a Westworld by having what's going on with Adrian Veidt in a much different time frame than what's happening in the main part of the story, and having a bunch of the racist people being taken down? I mean, I can see that this is going to be, it'll be really interesting to see what people have to say about Watchmen in the Black community. I'm very curious. But I think you're absolutely right about that. It's really going to take off. And of course, this is only the second week of Watchmen tonight. Kyle McCaskill says, Ryan Coogler, Black Wall Street movie. I'm sure that might be coming. And why shouldn't it? It's one of the most deplorable, yet it's also one of the most unbelievable, although not really unbelievable, but it's certainly shocking when you find out what happened. And a lot of people just have not heard about it. So I would say that we will definitely be probably seeing a movie like that in the future. And it's probably going to end up being great, I would imagine. So, ladies and gentlemen, do I have letters today? Why, yes, I do. Let's see. I'm so behind. This one comes from David Miller. Hey, Rob, hope you're having a better day. Just wondering, when you've spoken about running a sci-fi show, you've always extolled the virtues of being a cost-conscious producer. Good on you for that, sir. When I was shopping around my reality show 10 years ago, one of the interested parties said that they paid $1,000 a minute for video. Now, I know reality and scripted are two different animals and can't be compared, but could you produce a sci-fi show for $1,000 a minute? Double that budget, quintuple that budget? Thanks for all the good work. Positively yours, David Miller. Well, I can tell you, when I was doing long-form DVD special features like Superman, Requiem for Krypton, the Superman Returns documentary, or whether it was X-Men, or whether it was The Usual Suspects, or Valley Girl, or Star Trek V, or any of the movies that I was doing special features for, my formula was I charged $1,500 per minute. If you wanted original documentary material, it would be $1,500 per minute. And I did a lot of half-hour videos. And of course, as the budgets got bigger, I would reduce that cost, because obviously, as an example, if you're going to, say, shoot interviews with people, Valley Girl, for instance, Valley Girl had a much smaller budget. By the way, I love seeing all of our Valley Girl special features have been repurposed by Shout Factory in their recently released Valley Girl disc. But yes, I did the special features along with Dave Parker and Greg Carson from MGM for Valley Girl back in 2003. So the Valley Girl disc, we had a certain budget, but if you can get everybody to come in on one day, the money that you've spent on that shoot, rather than just shoot one or two people, you can make your money go further, and that means you can make more. You can make more stuff. So while $45,000 would be a half an hour documentary, sometimes I was able, depending on if I liked the project more, I would try and get more people in for the same amount of money, and sort of make those costs go. I don't think it's possible to make a science fiction series of any that's at all good for $1,000 a minute. I think it's pretty impossible. And it's pretty impossible. I'll tell you why. Because you're going to hire, I mean, you can hire you want to sell your show, first of all. The rule being, if you're going to make anything, you have to think about, well, what are you going to do with it once you're done? Where are you trying to get it to? And most things, like my friend Mark Altman has produced, he created Pandora for the CW. And that was recently renewed for a second season. Well, the CW, of course, that show was shot in Bulgaria, where I shot Hills Run Red. Now, your dollar goes a lot further in Bulgaria, but it doesn't go far enough. And Pandora is a show that's produced for a very low budget. But I think, it's out there, and the CW has it. So you have to ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to do with your finished show? Because it's not good enough just to make something. You have to think about where you're going to sell it. Because otherwise, why is anybody going to give you money? Here's one of the things that a lot of people who are independent filmmakers don't think about. They don't think about how exactly they're going to return their investors' money. That's one of the things that should be the first thing that comes to roll through your mind. Everybody's usually so excited, oh, we have the money to make this movie. And they don't think about what they're going to do with it. Because if you don't know what you're going to do with it, how are you going to get your investor their, or even a semblance of or a pretense of getting them their money back? If you're working in independent production, here's the thing. It's incredibly risky. And most of the people who are going to invest in your movie know how risky it is. And you cannot guarantee a return. I hate to say this. I hate that I'm going to say this, but it's true. If you are making independent film, you cannot guarantee a return to your investors. First and foremost, they have to understand that. You can give them, it's very funny when everybody says, well, I'd like to see your business model and all this. Because people are used to seeing things like, hey, if you want to build a building, or say you've bought a lot and you're going to put up a mixed use piece of real estate where the first floor is going to be retail, and then above that, maybe the second floor is retail or office space, and then above that, you've got apartment buildings. Now, based on the location of that building, how much square footage is worth and how much it costs. So you know that if you have investors and you're going to build that building, you can pretty much figure out how much money can we expect to get back in what amount of time. There's formulas you can follow. And that's true of most reasonable investments for anybody who's got money to invest. The first thing they want to know is, okay, give me your business plan. Well, any business plan when it comes to making independent movies, and I mean, like, let's say 5 million or less, none of it's true. I mean, you can't guarantee, there's no way, unless, of course, you already have a previously existing deal, like with, say, a streaming service. where a streaming service, you might have a 3-picture deal with a streaming service locked in place, but it's up to you to go find that money. Well, because you have a deal already, you know what you're going to be getting. That's a different thing. But if you want to produce an independent piece of cinema and you're just going to try and do it off the cuff, you cannot promise your investors anything. And remember, what you're trying to do is you want to get your investors 30% back. Now, that's a lot, for movies. Do we have to get 30%? Well, you should be shooting for 30% and you should be turning it around in 2 years. That's your plan if you're going to raise money. 30% return in 2 years. Any investor, that's pretty respectable. Can you do that when you're making an independent movie? Well, that remains to be seen. But in the back of your mind, that's what you're looking for. Also, one of the things you have to realize is that your movie, the quality of your film is it's what's going to sell it. And I mean quality across the board. You don't have to spend exorbitant amounts of money. Like if you guys haven't seen, is it Resolution and The Endless? Those movies, those to me are excellent, low budget films. And the guys also made a movie called Spring. It's 2 filmmakers. And those movies did not cost a lot, but they're the kind of movies I would aspire to make if you're going to make interesting genre fare. They were festival darlings and they've come out and they've done quite well for what they are. But making a show for $1,000, I mean, I would look, and again, it depends. If you're going to make a TV show that's a lot like, say, The Endless or Resolution or Spring, I would say, okay, give me $5,000 a minute. Let's say $5,000 a minute. I'll give you an example. I'll flat out say this. Femme Fatales that we did for HBO and Cinemax, which also Mark Altman and Steve Krazier created. Those were half-an-hour shows that were shot in 3 days. Very difficult show, even though, yes, it's a Skinemax show, but we tried to aspire to something better. I directed 5 episodes of Femme Fatales and edited most of my episodes myself, which is interesting for television. So those episodes were 3 days. They were budgetarily challenged, 30 minutes. And we were usually shooting in locations. We didn't even have standing sets, which was part of the reason that the episodes cost more. But they were usually, let's just say they were budgeted initially around $200,000. They usually ended up costing $250,000. But you're looking at that. So $200,000 for a Skinemax show, even though we aspired to more. Let's just say $200,000 for 30 minutes. So, what are you looking at there? That's more than 30 minutes into 2. You're looking at what? 7,000. I mean, you'd say 7,000 a minute. So it's 21 or $210,000. Is that what it'd be? So yeah, you're looking at $7,000 a minute to do Femme Fatales. So for a 30-minute show, basically. Now that's, Femme Fatales was a good-looking show. I stand by the work we did. We didn't have a lot of time to shoot it. There was not a lot of time to shoot coverage, but our DP was really good. Roger Jungarian, I thought he did a great job. And there was ways we could have, if we were shooting on standing sets. I created a TV show that I'm still trying to sell, that the point of it is to shoot it, every episode you shoot it on one set that you redress. You change it. It's different sets, but it's the same kind of location, so it's different every week. And I budgeted out for more than that. But I would say you could get away. I would say $10,000 a minute. Yeah, you come to me for $10,000 a minute, and I can make you. I will make you, depending on how many episodes you want to do. Let's just say we're going to do a 10-episode season. So there you go, $10,000 a minute. That's probably a really long answer, but anyway, this one comes from Jeffrey Mao, longtime imagination connoisseur Jeffrey Mao. Dear RMB, recently several communiques were found in the effects of former British Secret Intelligence Service officer Commander James Bond, R&R, CMG, OBE, codename 007. I present them unedited for your perusal. It should be clear after reading why he is now former. Greetings, sir. It's no time to die unless you only live twice. Then you can die another day until the world is not enough, because tomorrow never dies. So can you really live and let die? I'm the man with the golden gun and eye with a gold finger on the trigger, and I can shoot out the living daylights from A View to a Kill. Sincerely, James Bond. My dear James, diamonds are forever, and so am I, so please don't be a Dr. No and never say never again. I want that ring. Don't always be on Her Majesty's Secret Service, or I might have to get a license to kill. Love, Moneypenny. Greetings, sir. My chemin de fer game with Le Chiffre at Casino Royale is going well. I've made so much money, I can make the sky fall with a great thunder ball. But if I lose, I can spare a quantum of solace for my specter. Bond. My dearest James, this is terrible, Jeffrey. You should be ashamed of yourself, and I'm even more deeply ashamed to be reading this. My dearest James, I come from Russia with love on the Moonraker. I have a little octopussy, but it's for your eyes only. Won't you be the spy who loved me? Loved, Anya. XXX. Ha, ha, ha. This is terrible. Don't ever write me these things again. This comes from Casey Keaton. With your connection to the Star Trek franchise, not only as a fan, but as a distributor and creator of sorts, do you have any knowledge that things might get better for the franchise? Or is everything we've had to swallow since 2009 here to stay forever? I just want Star Trek to use its figurative cerebrum again, and it seems like that might never happen. I want to be hyped for Picard, but I worry it's going to continue to be this anachronistic, fatalistic attitude. Well, Casey, first of all, like you, hope springs eternal. I always wanted things to be better. I think the custodianship of Star Trek is wrong, but that custodianship continues on, and it doesn't seem to be abating anytime soon. And, hey, we're getting a Nickelodeon show. We're getting another animated show. We're getting all kinds of stuff. I think for the time being, Star Trek is in a place. Look, I hope that Picard is great. I think Picard is going to be a watershed moment for the Star Trek franchise. If Star Trek Picard is good, and I'm not going to say it's not going to be good because I haven't seen it yet. I want it to be good. But from what I've seen, Michael Chabon has written 2 short treks now. I hated both of them. And he's running Picard. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But I don't know. I don't know if perhaps modern creators, especially we haven't seen in the last 10 years, really have a handle on what Star Trek is supposed to be. I've always said in its DNA, Star Trek is about the excellence of humanity. It is an elitist show that is about the best of the best. And we live in a world now where I don't know if people are capable of telling those kinds of stories anymore. I don't know. And I think that fundamentally, maybe Star Trek is in a place where there aren't people that really know how, at least people that work in television, because it's de rigueur to not talk to. No one is excellent anymore. Everybody's deeply flawed and troubled and problematic, and it's not fashionable to write stories about people that are great at what they do, that are just great people. And I don't know where Star Trek is going to be. I think the very idea, the very DNA of Star Trek, this idea that you're telling stories about great people is, and that's not to say people don't have problems, but there are people that are fundamentally the best of the best. And I don't know if anybody knows how to do that anymore. But we shall see. Who knows? This one comes from Garth. Hi, Robert. Just to follow on your feedback with regards to spoilers before viewing The Terminator Dark Fate, like I say, the element of surprise is not there anymore if you more or less know about what is going to happen in a movie. Anticipation is how the movie performs is totally diluted and makes no sense in even buying the ticket and making the effort to make the trip to watch it. Going along with that same mentality, Netflix is doing exactly that. The less you know about the movie other than the trailer, the better the viewing pleasure. It's a good point. In doing that, bad mouthing of the trailer based on the movie is down to a minimum. Less publicity will maximize the level of my enjoyment, your enjoyment, or disappointment, depending on how good or bad the movie is. You admitted finally no spoilers, please. Well, you know what, Garth? That's really not a bad point to make. Like, I knew nothing really about El Camino. I thought they marketed El Camino brilliantly. Now, did I think El Camino was the end all be all of? No, but what it felt like to me was an episode of Breaking Bad, an extended episode, and I liked it. I really liked what went on. I liked where Jesse went. I liked where it left me. I thought it was really effectively made. It probably didn't cost a lot of money. It didn't embarrass. It certainly didn't diminish Breaking Bad at all. A lot of people said, do we need to know this story? Well, perhaps not. But series creator Vince Gilligan came back and gave us a very respectable piece of entertainment. And if that was included as a 2-part episode of the show, people would have loved it. And I loved it. And part of the reason I loved it was because I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea where it was going to go. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. So you might really be onto something there. Now, on to the criticism with regards to Marvel movies by Marty and Francis. I'm puzzled why nobody questions the quality of movies. What I mean is that when watching the Kevin Feige palette of superhero movie, I do feel the enjoyment level is quite high, and all 23 movies are so well made in their action choreography and storytelling. So they're good, especially when it comes to things like Civil War and Endgame. They're the best in my opinion, but frankly, once the euphoria is over, the feeling for the characters is at best on a platonic level, but it's one hell of a roller coaster fantasy ride. And what's wrong with that? But if you view the palette of movies coming from Martin Scorsese, his movies are mostly down-to-earth character-driven stories based on someone's experience in society during the time it was filmed. They're thinking people's movies, and the reason why after viewing these films, I'm left with a deep impression because it is more or less based on the reality of those eras. Be it Taxi Driver or the upcoming The Irishman, the characters are based on true stories. How true, of course, nobody knows. It's because of that association you feel for the characters more because it happened to someone. Take The Shawshank Redemption. I can bet you it is probably a pretty accurate portrayal of inmates in prison during the time they were there and what freedom meant to them after it is taken away after imprisonment. We feel for the characters more. It left us pondering even as we exited the theaters long into the night. All in all, one should not be too judgmental about anything. Not all movies are made for everyone. One is a fantasy ride, which makes you feel young again after watching it, and the other is nonfiction or fictional based on reality, and it makes you question the facts of life and the path that lies ahead. One can still enjoy both types of films, and you can walk away with confidence that movies can take you to the highest limits of fantasy, but also give you a taste of the realities of living back down here on Earth. This is the magic of movie storytelling. Don't you think it's true? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Well, Garth, I would say absolutely it's true. That's why I don't get it. To me, when I watch superhero films or superhero movies based on Marvel Comics or the DCEU, I have a certain expectation, and we're now getting peak superhero storytelling. It took a very long time for us to get here. Both we needed the technology, and we also needed people that grew up with this material to the point where they took it seriously enough to make it what it is today. And I think both are true. I mean, I like watching both. If all I did was watch Marvel movies, I would be left seriously undernourished intellectually undernourished. My favorite movies are not usually genre movies. I mean, horror and science fiction, there are very few movies I would put up in my top 50 that are from those genres. Most of my favorite movies are about people. I like movies about Earth, people that live today, being down to earth, real stories that I think have value across the board. That's not to say I don't love comic book movies, but comic book movies are not the kind of movies I watch again and again and again and again. I watch movies like All About Eve or Sunset Boulevard or Elizabeth. I showed Elizabeth Mommy Dearest. I saw Mommy Dearest like 4 times. I was fascinated by that film. Do I think that's real life? Probably not. But at least the story about a crazy driven actress and what she was willing to do or sacrifice and how her brain just couldn't quite, she couldn't quite break out of Hollywood to be the mother she really wanted to be, but just didn't know how to be because she was driven insane by the business. And, I just think that I'd rather watch, given a choice, if someone said, okay, Rob, you cannot watch science fiction, fantasy, or horror films anymore. You can only watch movies. I mean, I would draw the line. Like when I say fantasy movies, I'd still get to be able to watch Wings of Desire. I could still get to watch all that jazz. So they have fantasy elements, but the demarcation point, no more Lord of the Rings, no more Star Wars, no more Star Trek. If I had to make that choice, I would take I would leave the genre behind. I know people would be like, come on, really? Yes, I would. I would. Um, this is an interesting. Franz M from Germany has written a number of letters, but I'm going to read this letter because he pisses me off, and I don't think he's being serious, but I'm going to read it anyway. This comes from Franz M. Wait a minute. Now that I've set that up, let's go back and see. Let's see. Wow, there's a lot of movies. Pop says Bombshell movie. Jay Roach's back looks dope AF. You know what? It does. Bombshell looks really great. For those who don't know, it's the Megyn Kelly, Roger Ailes movie that they recently. Russell Crowe played Roger Ailes in the miniseries, and Bombshell is the feature version of that story, and it looks terrific. Margot Robbie's in it. Charlize Theron's in it. Nicole Kidman is in it. And of course, John Lithgow plays Roger Ailes. Looks great to me. I can't wait to see it. So I hope, I can't wait. I'm going. Looks like an Oscar contender to me. Timbula the Spider Monkey says, which horror franchise had its wheels fall off the hardest? Hellraiser, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, or Friday the 13th? That's a good one. That's a good question. Okay, let me take these one at a time. I think that Nightmare on Elm Street is a pretty respectable franchise. Even the first 5 movies, all the way through The Dream Child, they're fun to watch. There's a lot, the fantasy elements. I think they just got, definitely respectable, at least through the 5th one. So I got to give it up. Give it up for Nightmare. That has its respectability. Halloween, I think Halloween, at least it did. There's interesting things with the mythology. There's been good Halloween movies, bad Halloween movies. Of course, we have Halloween 3, which is anomalous, which I love. So I think Halloween is kind of respectable as well. And Friday the 13th never aspired to much. And sure, they did things like The New Blood and, of course, Freddy versus Jason. They did goofy stuff, but Friday the 13th never aspired to much in the first place. So, could it go off the rails? Sure, but it didn't go off the rails that hard. I'm gonna go with Hellraiser. I think Hellraiser. Because, even Hellraiser 2, Hellbound, the first 2 Hellraiser movies are pretty interesting. Obviously, the Hellbound Heart, the novella was written by Clive Barker, and he wrote and directed the first film. I think the first Hellraiser is one of my favorite of all the horror movies of the last 30 years. What is that? 80? Is it 87? Hellraiser, the first Hellraiser is 87, I think. It's 87. Pretty sure. I loved Hellraiser 1 and Hellraiser 2. Anthony Hickok's Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. It was not horrible, but what happened with the Hellraiser franchise is they lost all of the budgets. And dude, I bought the Arrow Scarlet box. I've got Hellraiser 1, 2, and 3 in that beautiful Arrow set. I bought it. How could you not? But the problem with the Hellraiser movies is they had no budget. You've got characters that inherently you need a lot of special effects to look at the depiction of hell. There's miniature effects. There's all kinds of effects in Hellraiser 2, but they just took away the budgets and they kept cranking out horror. They kept cranking out Hellraiser movies as if they were Friday the 13th movies. They needed bigger budgets. They needed better writing. So I think the Hellraiser franchise, that's a good question. I like that question. I think the Hellraiser franchise fell the hardest. I think. Mark C says, instead of this Watchmen show, I'd have rather they take the Martha Washington story by Frank Miller and Dave Gibbons, Give Me Liberty. I find that would serve the same story need. Dude, if you guys have not read Give Me Liberty, it's great. I have a beautiful hardcover volume of that. I love those stories. Martha Washington is, of course, a Black female protagonist. Those stories touch upon a lot of the same things. Look, my problem with at least the one episode of Watchmen that I've seen is it is so heavy-handed. So heavy-handed. Like, if you didn't know, let us beat you over the head with our woke storytelling. I mean, I hate saying woke storytelling, but even starting, in Selma in 1921. Now, what's interesting about that is a lot of people didn't know about that. There's a lot of people that had no idea what happened on Black Wall Street. They didn't know. And it's I think it's good in that way. And the idea that we're talking about racism and police brutality and vigilantism and all of that is loosely connected to the Watchmen universe. But I feel that I'm listening to somebody's political treatise, whereas I think there was a lot more going on in the original Watchmen. I mean, maybe look, after one episode, we got 9 hours and we've seen 1 hour of it. So I want to see where it goes. I mean, I'm just judging by what Damon Lindelof has given us in the past. I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I watched The Leftovers, right? And in The Leftovers, you had 2% of the human population vanish. Whether they were raptured, whether God took them, you don't know, right? So once you live in a world where 2% of the people just disappeared, whenever you're confronted by something that's odd, when Scott Glenn, who played Justin Theroux's father, the former sheriff, it has voices in his head that know something. Clearly, the voices that are talking to Scott Glenn have something to say. And there was never a moment where his son, who sat him down and said, "Okay, Dad, in light of the fact that these people had disappeared, 2% of the population disappeared, might I have a word with the voices in your head?" This is storytelling number one. And he never did that. Lindelof never did that. There was never an episode that way. They kind of just dropped all of that. I feel that we're going to get this idea that Watchmen is going to be so profound. But I'll wait and see. Maybe, again, I want it to be good because I love the original Watchmen comic book series so much. I just feel that what they're doing is not, it's, if you wanted to make a show about these issues, why not make an original show about these very same issues? Why not do an alternate history story, or better yet, do a story about that directly confronts? I mean, I understand great science fiction, great fantasy is allegorical, great horror, allegorical. But in this case, it's almost like they're grafting on, at least from the first episode, they're grafting on a story onto the Watchmen brand. I'm just curious to see where it goes. So we shall see. But yes, if you guys have not read the Martha Washington Give Me Liberty stories by Frank Miller, they're really worth checking out. Great comics. Zachary King says, "Rob, I've heard you mention the Hunt for Red October on the show. I don't think Elizabeth is here, so she can't chime in on this. But Rob, I've heard you mention Hunt for Red October on the show. Could you expand on what you love about it? McTiernan made some great flicks." Well, I think it's a great story that's well told. It's a big, sprawling story with multiple points of view. And I really like all of the characters. I like the way people act. First of all, I love the way it's shot. I love Jan de Bont's cinematography. I love Basil Polidoris' score. And it has a really compelling central narrative. You know, the idea that a man who has nothing left to lose is wanting to preserve. You don't expect a Russian sea captain, a Russian commander of such high regard to steal the most advanced weapon of war that the Soviet Union has put out, ever made, perhaps, because he believes it's a first strike weapon and shouldn't be allowed to be in the hands of the Soviets, who will use it. So he puts everything on the line, and his men put everything on the line, and they light off with the Red October and to defect. And I just think that the story is very, very compelling. It's very interesting. The motivations of the characters are great. And then a man that's out of his depth, Alec Baldwin's Jack Ryan, who's out of his depth and shouldn't be doing what he's doing, gets called upon to rise up to the occasion and basically prevent what could wind up being World War III or worse. I think everything about the story is just really, really compelling. And as far as populist studio filmmaking goes, McTiernan was at the top of his game, coming off of Predator and Die Hard. Even if you want to go back to Nomads, which was a really interesting genre movie, sort of a horror fantasy that he wrote starring Pierce Brosnan. If you want to do that, and by the way, Nomads is worth checking out. If you haven't seen Nomads, McTiernan made it before he made Predator. It's really interesting. Is it great? Maybe not, but it's interesting. And I don't know. I always thought that I used to watch Nomads and Candyman together a lot. What that says about me, I don't know, because I had them on Laserdisc. But yeah, I really love Hunt for Red October. I think it's great filmmaking. I hope that answered your question. Travis Rayner says, "Rob, you're a regular encyclopedia of entertainment media." I hope to meet you when you're back in the Seattle area. Live long and prosper. Well, I think what's interesting is I've just been a fan of pop culture my whole life. And my friend Steve Melching once was bestowing superhero names on everybody, and he said I would be the watcher. My superpower was I tried to stay aware or abreast of everything, and even if I can't read every major novel that comes out, which I can't, I read about them. And what are they about, and who's writing them? I mean, not all of them, but when there's a zeitgeist book or something, and then comics I keep abreast of. I have 70 long boxes, 65 long boxes of comics. And I don't buy individual comics anymore, but I still like following them all. I mean, I didn't want to get back into X-Men. I'm sucked into X-Men now. Hickman's X-Men. What he basically did was so all of the X-Men continuity happened, but he literally did something I thought was impossible. He completely changed. It was better than taking all the cards in the deck and reshuffling them. He somehow reinvented the X-Men concept stayed the same, but the status quo is completely different now. And it's really interesting. So there's always something new coming out, but I appreciate that. I just pay attention. I just like all of this stuff. And to me, growing up, I think a lot of it had to do with growing up and coming of age in the 80s, because I was interested in music. So I was going to Tower Records every week, seeing, what new bands came out, what new import 12 inches could I buy. I was interested in movies. The one thing I must say that I'm not up on that I would like to be, there are two things. Fashion. I really appreciate fashion. I know nothing about it. Jeans and a t-shirt, if that's all I wore for the rest of my life, I would be happy. But I love fashion. What I need to do is go back to my high school weight of 195 pounds, because I could wear anything. To wear great clothes, if you're a man, you have to be in good shape. Say what you want, but you really do. You really do. If you're gonna wear, Armani, or you're gonna wear Tom Ford, or you're gonna wear whatever designer. I'm a huge Tom Ford fan. If you're gonna wear designer clothes, you have to have a good physique. And as a middle-aged man with one foot in the grave, I drink a lot less than I used to, but I should be really doing CrossFit or training every day. Then I could wear what I would want to wear. But art, like fine arts and fashion, are the two areas which I fall down on. And I admire anyone that knows a lot about high fashion and fine arts. Elizabeth knows a lot about fine arts, which is great. And because I don't. It was one I tried taking fine arts, art history in college, and I found it, I couldn't get into it. But I admire everyone else. But growing up in the 80s, pop culture was great. Books, especially genre fiction, movies, music. It was a great time to grow up, and it all was sort of intertwined. Music and movies were really informing each other at the time. And there was a lot of great books that were coming out, a lot of horror novels, a lot of novels. It was great. Pop culture was great. And it was just something that I really loved. And then the spin-offs, the toys and physical media and stuff like that. So yeah, well, next time I go back to Seattle, we should hang out. So back to Franz M's letter. October is all the rage for horror. By the way, this pissed me off, Franz. You pissed me off with this letter, just so you know. October is all the rage for horror movies. It's the month that includes Halloween, and it's right in between the end of summer and November. Unlike my handful of holiday horror, which includes Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, I can't understand why Jaws continuously pops up on the greatest horror movie lists and critiques. It is not great and not a horror movie. It is a horrible movie, and I pray nobody watches it this year, because there are so many fantastic films overlooked and far more deserving of a place of honor in horror's hallowed halls of fame. The majority of people most definitely believe the 1975 classic from Steven Spielberg is a horror film, with many categorizing it as the greatest horror film ever made simply because it features a giant shark hunting people from the depths of the ocean. Interestingly, this pedestrian premise is not at all that dissimilar from Jurassic Park, wherein dinosaurs eat pedestrians and park employees in a park, which is more readily and accurately described as a thriller. Of course, both movies have plenty of arguably horrific, dark, and creepy elements. Jaws has that boat scene and some blood and gore. Still, it doesn't have that Lovecraft ambience. It has nothing to do with it has nothing with which makes the soul shiver. It could conceivably cause children's cocks to cumburst with excitement, or perhaps erupt into hysterical gales of laughter cheesiness of the animatronic creature. Come on, dude. Jaws is less of a horror film and more of a pulp adventure movie. Again, not dissimilar to Jurassic Park, featuring thinly drawn, ridiculous characters, raking fingernails across a blackboard to gain attention, stewing shark bones, and humming shanties. Martin, Matt, and Quint are actually hunting the shark while the shark hunts them, and they, well, except for Quint, ultimately prevail. Horror movies, for the most part, should involve something inescapable or supernatural. In Jaws, after roughly 40 minutes of ashore boringness, finally somebody else cares about let me read this again. In Jaws, after roughly 40 minutes of ashore boringness, finally somebody else cares about gets eaten. And instead of everyone mutually insanely arguing not to go into the water anymore, our three protagonist idiots decide to begin hunting the shark with a boat, despite the fact that nobody with any semblance of a brain would be swimming near the beach. In other words, not only does the plot make no sense, the entire second half of this movie is filler in the sense that it didn't need to exist at all. I've tried to find a redeeming quality somewhere that justifies its status as a classic, but other than the fact that it was directed by Steven Spielberg, I don't have a single positive thing to say about this film. But isn't Steven Spielberg the same cinematic artist who gave us E.T., the shameless Old Yeller ripoff? Boy meets dog, boy loses dog, boy learns life lesson, and transposed it onto the plot about a penis-faced alien with a lame-ass superpower to heal things and make things grow who crash-landed on Earth? At least One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest beat it for Best Picture. Well, not in the same year. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a mid-'70s film. E.T. came out in 1982. The Butterfly Effect is a movie about a young man played by Ashton Kutcher who finds a way to travel back through time and alter his own past, hopefully for the better. Things don't turn out well as the time traveler learns that any actions he takes to rectify past mistakes only winds up destroying the future for both him and everyone he loves. Gradually, he realizes the awful truth about himself, the truth that many of the best of us suspect about ourselves from time to time, and so many more of us desperately need to understand. Life would be better for everyone if we could go back to where our mothers were going into labor and strangle ourselves in her womb. The Butterfly Effect is a thrilling, inventive, and yes, even dark and disturbing romantic science fiction film that managed to do the almost impossible for me. It made me care about the fate of Ashton Kutcher. If I said I love this movie, that would be an understatement, as close to a lie as I understand it can be. The Butterfly Effect is hands down one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. If for whatever reason you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it now. I love Halloween. It's the liberal holiday that teaches children to go knock on people's doors and beg for handouts. It gives girls an excuse to dress like whores. Wishing all you members of the Post-Geek Singularity some terrible thrills this Halloween season. P.S. Is Tim Curry's laugh the most delicious thing in the world? Yes, of course it is. What a stupid question. Well, Franz, I'm just going to assume that this letter is being written in jest. I think Jaws is one of the finest films ever made. I don't see it. It has horrific elements. I don't see it as a horror movie. I do see it as an adventure film. And how can you not love E.T., man? How can you not love E.T.? But I read that letter from you because you're a member of the Post-Geek Singularity community, and I think you're putting everybody on. But who knows? This one comes from Christopher Collins. You've talked many times about how many will not be satisfied by J.J. Abrams the way he solves Star Wars. My biggest concern is that I really don't want Rise of Skywalker to end in a way like the show Lost did. Do you think it will end off closer to Star Trek Deep Space Nine or Growing Pains did as a series, separating all the characters, or something like Star Trek Voyager, bringing them all home, or some other type of show? That's a good question. First of all, people are going to die in this movie. I think the characters that, I don't want to set up a Deadpool. I don't want to do that, but I think people are going to die. Life during wartime. People die. And I think this movie, look, I'm just not a fan of J.J. Abrams as a filmmaker. That doesn't mean I don't go into all of his movies wanting to love them, because I do. I want to love them. But I think that his writing has never transcended television. I don't think he's ever written anything for me that feels like it has the import of what a feature film should have. And I don't know if he's capable of writing a conclusion to the Skywalker saga, even though he has Chris Terrio writing with him. I think the video that I posted, the link to the Popcast video, I love that video. To me, is if they were able to convey everything that's in that video. I mean, some of it I don't like. Like, I don't like what they did with the Vader mask, but the ideas behind it. I love the idea that they're bringing Palpatine back, somebody who was a presence in the 6 movies, and bringing him back for the 9th is pretty interesting. And the way the Popcast guys go into it, if in fact, I mean, I don't want to talk, but you know what? I'm just going to talk about it. People are there are many theories about what people are saying, and whether it's spoilers or not. I mean, I don't care. I mean, even though I talk about, I'm just going to say, if you watch that, there is this idea going around that, let's just say, Palpatine has been manipulating bloodlines and dealing with cloning technology. I like all that. I like all that stuff because it's set up. There were the Clone Wars. I did not like how what we find out. I don't, Sifo Dyas creating a clone army. No, none of that's, I mean, Sifo Dyas wasn't Sidious. All of it, it all played out very oddly to me. But that's why I like Dark Empire. If you read the Dark Empire comic from the early 90s, I thought it was pretty good. And the idea that cloning technology was used to resurrect Emperor Palpatine makes sense to me. You know, getting into the spiritual with his Force essence or whatever. Sure. Now, if they can pull that off, bringing Palpatine back, they could justify the whole series. If certain origins that have been reported about Rey turn out to be true, I'm all for that. Why not? Bring it on. And the way that it relates back to Ben Solo and Luke, whatever those theories may be, I'm into it. Because why not? I just don't think that J.J. Abrams is as capable a writer to pull it off, even with Chris Terrio. I don't see that. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if he's a smart enough plotter and a smart enough writer to do it. But I am pulling for him. And the way I think it's going to end, people are going to have been lost. I don't think it's going to be as fractured. I think we're going to see the characters come back, at least for a Return of the Jedi party, and with the appearance of some Force ghosts. I mean, I think that's what we're going to see. I don't know if that quite answers your question about how I think it's going to end, but people are going to die. And horses are going to die. I think horses are going to die. I really do. Because why wouldn't they? Let's see. Nico Nacho Z send in a super chat. Thank you, Nico Nacho Z. Thanks for supporting the channel. I appreciate that. Mark C says, my favorite McTiernan film is Medicine Man. Good story, good acting, beautifully shot, and an amazing score. See, I don't know if anyone's putting me on when they do this. I mean, you know, it's I like always seeing Sean Connery in a movie, but I can't go with you there. It's beautifully shot. There's good acting. It's Lorraine Bracco and Sean Connery, right? I don't know if she was exactly the best cast person. Was it Lorraine Bracco? Now that I'm thinking about it, perhaps not. Let me check. Let's see. You know, can't remember anything. It's been a long time since I've seen this movie. Yeah, it is Lorraine Bracco. All right, 40 million. I didn't dig it. It was one of those Hollywood Pictures movies. I can't go there with you. I think John McTiernan, you know, between Predator, Alien, between Predator, Die Hard, and Hunt for Red October, that was a run of movies. I don't know which is my favorite, but I think probably Die Hard or Red October. Fried cheese macaroni ball says budgets have increased to achieve the same. Why? Oh, I see what you're saying. Why have the budgets for movies gone up so much and we're still getting the same kinds of movies? Well, things just got more expensive. And I'll tell you what else. Even though we've got CGI and all that, the technology has become very expensive. It's come down, but if you look and see, just look at the credits of a Marvel movie. Look at how many people are working on Marvel films now. The amount of people that are working on special effects has increased exponentially. And there's a lot more people working on these movies than used to work on those films. Like, ILM used to do, you'd hire ILM to do all the effects in a movie. They might go out, they might hire other contractors to do things, but you'd hire ILM and they would do all of your effects. Go back and read Cinefex articles, Cinefex magazine, which is still being published, which I still love. You go back and you read Cinefex articles from the 80s, you see, and then you read Cinefex articles today. It's like, my God, it's so different. And there's also inflation. Things are more expensive. Things are just, and there's a lot more ambition. Even if you're going to make a car chase movie, before you just pay for a car chase movie. But now even car chases have all kinds of CG assistance. And it just costs a lot more to deliver the same amount of things on movies, because, like a movie like Hobbs and Shaw 30 years ago would have been made without all the visual effects because you couldn't do them. But now you can do them. So movies, even action films, are just availing themselves of technology that didn't exist before. And it just increased the budgets of films. But I agree with you. Budgets have increased to achieve the same. I don't think it's entirely the same. There's just things you could never have done in the past. Or also, you look at David Fincher movies. David Fincher uses a lot of visual effects to create period pieces, or he'll shoot on a street corner and use VFX to alter the environment in ways that you wouldn't even know he's doing. So there's just things, the technology has allowed things to be done that was never being done in the past. So that's part of the reason. Jonathan Peck says, it's been a month into Joker's release, and its social effects have been either harmless in the US and outside the States, with the dancing, the stairs in the Bronx, or a protest in Lebanon to Hong Kong to Chile. Wait a minute, let me read that again. Jonathan Peck says, it's been a month into Joker's release, and its social effects have been either harmless in the US and outside the States, with the dancing, the stairs in the Bronx, or a protest in Lebanon to Hong Kong to Chile. What Jonathan is referring to, by the way, thank you for supporting the channel. I very much appreciate that, sir. What Jonathan is referring to, yes, the incel uprising that was expected based on Joker becoming a poster boy for the oppressed incels in the world, didn't happen. Well, I think anybody who was watching the movie realized that Joker is a film that is certainly not advocating violence. The violence in Joker is ugly. It is certainly not attractive in any way, shape, or form. And beyond somebody taking life and taking revenge on being abused or put upon, it's not presented a delicious way. It is ugly, it is dirty, and it is not something that is desirable. However, what I have been fascinated by is, yes, we've seen that there are protests in Lebanon. I didn't know about Chile or Hong Kong, but we have certainly uprisings in Chile and Hong Kong. We have people in Chile. I saw a photograph of a giant protest where people were playing classical instruments, which is amazing to me. But in Lebanon, people have been painting themselves as the Joker. And I think that across the board, we have a lot of problems now where we have rampant income inequality, and we're seeing forces, and we have totalitarian regimes trying to impose power on people. And with the social media ability that our cell phones and smartphones and everything gives us, we're seeing the kinds of protests that are actually ultimately, I think, beneficial. There's sea changes happening everywhere. And on one hand, we're in the last gasp. I mean, the last gasp might last decades, but we're in the last gasp of the old ways of doing things, and we're seeing the beginnings of a truly global culture begin to emerge. I'm not one of those people that is necessarily afraid of that, but the global culture that's going to emerge is going to have to take into consideration that whether it's the 1% or the elite, they're no longer going to be supported by a population of people that are basically a slave class that does not benefit from the fruits of everyone's labor. We've seen it happen in the past. It's happening now on a global scale. It's quite interesting, actually. I think, in a way, I look at it as being uplifting, to be honest. But yeah, it's interesting that we're seeing that happening. Really interesting, to be honest. Joel Summers is here. Joel Summers writes in and says, there's nothing wrong with making a list of scary movies, but for this Halloween, I wanted to celebrate the works inspired by that which came before. Most of these are movies. At least one is a short story, but all of them celebrate a frightening tapestry of works inspired by prior screams. I really love the 2010 remake of George Romero's classic, The Crazies. Timothy Olyphant is top-notch in a movie that does one of my favorite tricks. It flips genres halfway through. For those of you who have not seen The Crazies, that does star Timothy Olyphant and Rhoda Mitchell, it's great. I don't normally, I mean, I often talk about remakes of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, John Carpenter's The Thing, and David Cronenberg's The Fly, to a certain extent, Chuck Russell's The Blob. The Crazies does not get nearly enough credit. The Crazies was an early 70s Romero film that he made before Martin and Dawn of the Dead. It was known as Codename Trixie, but it was The Crazies. If you watch the original Crazies, it's about a biological outbreak that goes horrible. It's terrible what happens. The Romero film is really good and it's a low budget effort, but you can, especially from an editorial standpoint, I've always admired the editorial work that was done in The Crazies. The remake of The Crazies, I want to say Breck Eisner directed The Crazies. Let me check. I'm not sure. I'm going to check. 2010. Yes, Breck Eisner did direct Mike Eisner's son. I love The Crazies, the remake of The Crazies. I think it's really good. I think it's really effective. I think it's actually genuinely scary, or at least tense. One of the things that I really love about The Crazies is Timothy Olyphant as the main protagonist, as the sheriff of this small town, is smart. And it has one of my favorite, it's a little thing, but in terms of storytelling, I really love it. There's a scene where shit's starting to go down, and Oliphant is deputy, and his deputy is actually really, really good. Who plays his deputy? I have to see. I have to look. What's so great is I can just do this live and find out. Gosh, I don't know who. I'm looking at this. Is it Joe Anderson? I think Joe Anderson's his deputy. There's a scene where it's like they come into work in the morning and they're in the police station and they find out that the internet and the phone lines are dead, and they realize we're in trouble, and they start to act. So they're trying to stay ahead of the curve, and eventually circumstances conspire against them. If you guys haven't seen The Crazies, I highly recommend it. It's really good. Romero's is really good too, but as a modern remake, I was very surprised by The Crazies. It doesn't get enough love. It should. By the way, this was Joel Summers' letter, and I just stopped because I had to wax rhapsodic about The Crazies. The first time you see one of David Cronenberg's surgical devices designed for use on mutant women, you realize Dead Ringers has left the true events inspiring its narrative in a cloud of ether and heroin. Jeremy Irons plays twin surgeons spiraling into nightmarish addiction. I love Dead Ringers. It might be Cronenberg's best film. It's amazing. Jeremy Irons is amazing. The Conjuring is another claiming to be inspired by true events. I love this movie because it eschews CGI and jump scares by and large for old-fashioned horror. Yeah, but The Conjuring is great. Love The Conjuring, and it does have some good jump scares. The Forgotten. Interesting to see this on a list. I agree. I've always liked this movie. The Forgotten might be inspired by true events, but really, how would we know? The aliens control everything, including our memories. Julianne Moore is fantastic in this psychedelic thriller. Love it. Good call. Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is among my favorite David Lynch movies. I loved how fans of the series were given very little to cling to in the wild ride that ensues. It's a truly frightening story of a girl suffering from sexual abuse, and there's no happy ending. I agree. Fire Walk with Me is a masterpiece. I think it is a horror film, and it deals with sexual abuse in a very, if you've ever had to come across, which I had to deal with the situation in my own life, not me personally, but with a friend of mine that I had to help out. It has a lot to say, and it's a tough movie. Really good. Based on the historic evening where several storied authors spend a frightening night hallucinating together, Gothic is a gorgeous guess at just how Mary Shelley got the idea to write Frankenstein. Ken Russell at his trippy best. Love Gothic. Good list. It Follows. may not be inspired by true events, but it's certainly inspired by actual venereal diseases. Specifically, what if a venereal disease was shaped like a human that followed you everywhere? It follows, while not the cinematic disappointment that I felt Return of the Jedi was when I first saw it, it follows, man, I was pissed after I saw that movie. I loved the first 45 minutes. Love the first 45 minutes. And then they get to this boathouse scene, and the whole thing went out the window for me. And I read an interview with the director where they had this great premise that they didn't even really understand, and they certainly didn't follow their own rules, and it pissed me off. But the first 45 minutes I think are great. But I can't stand with you. I can't go with you with the whole movie because I thought it was a huge letdown. I was waiting to see where they were going to take it, and oh, what a disappointment. House of the Devil is a love letter to the understated 70s atmospheric devil worship set pieces like Rosemary's Baby. I'm betting Rob loves this movie. Another movie, it's Ty West, and I was really looking forward to seeing that movie, and it really left me cold. I love my satanic cult movies, the 70s. You know that. Give me the devil, give me satanic cults. I'm a happy person. So I should have loved House of the Devil. It let me down. It let me down. I mean, you know, there's nothing better than a good satanic cult movie when it's good, but there's nothing more disappointing to me if the satanic cult movie does not cut the mustard. And I didn't love House of the Devil. What's not to love about Return of the Living Dead from 1984? The movie is probably responsible for the notion that zombies eat brains, and it is the punk rock middle finger to an establishment that was beginning to tire of George Romero's beloved trilogy. I don't know if people were beginning to tire of George Romero's beloved trilogy, because I certainly hadn't, but Return of the Living Dead is awesome. It's awesome. To me, it's I mean, yes, it's more overtly funny, and it's more of a comedy, you know, send more cops, you know, but it's so great. And the punk soundtrack, and Linnea Quigley, right? Didn't she capture the hearts and minds of many a Fangoria reader? You got to love Return of the Living Dead. It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Now, this is something that's really interesting that I didn't know. And I got to, I'm reading this. Peter Watts couldn't have known he'd win all the awards when he wrote The Things. But this short story detailing the life and times of the shape-shifting creature from another world that John Carpenter made famous in his movie The Thing is unexpectedly heart-wrenching while also disgusting and terrifying. The notion that the things don't even know they're the things is harrowing and brilliant. Okay. This is why I love this community. Peter Watts, the author Peter Watts, wrote, I'm a huge fan of Peter Watts. He wrote a book called Blind Sight that, for whatever reason, it was nominated for a Hugo Award in 2006. I'm obsessed with Peter Watts. I'm obsessed with his book, Blind Sight. This letter that Joel has written here is the first time that I've ever heard that Peter Watts has written a short story called The Things that's about John Carpenter's The Thing, which is John W. Campbell's Who Goes There. Until I read this letter, I did not know it existed. Now I'm like a kid in a candy store. I cannot wait. When I get off this broadcast, I'm going to go find this story. I hope I can find it online and read it. I need to read this story now because it's by Peter Watts. I had no idea this story even existed. So that is why I love you, imagination connoisseurs, and Joel Summers. Thank you, because I had no idea that Peter Watts, if any science fiction writer, if you told me, I'd be like, oh, but if Peter Watts wrote it, I mean, that to me, that is like literary cocaine. I want to go chop that paper up. I want to snort, like I'm going to roll it out into fatty rails, and I'm just going to like put it on a mirror, and I'm going to snort it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to snort the fatty rails that used to be the paper that Peter Watts' stories on. That's how much I want to write. I want to mainline this. Maybe I'll mix it up. I'll give myself a speedball of literary goodness. Thank you. I did not know this existed. I can't believe Peter Watts wrote a short story, a sequel to John Carpenter's The Thing, about the things and what you wrote about it. My God. This is actually a great list. I have to say, Joel, thank you, because I didn't go into my favorite horror movies because, I started to, and I just got overwhelmed. I'm like, I can't, my stack was like 50 high, and I'm like, I can't, because when I talk about movies, I feel like, well, there's the canon of 20 movies that everybody knows. And who wants me to go, yes, here's Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist. I mean, you know, which is what I would end up doing. I love Dawn of the Dead. I love Alien. You know, you should read or watch Zalewski's Possession. Try that. Get it uncut. Get it from Mondo. But this, Joel, thank you for this letter. This was great. I can't believe Peter Watts wrote a story about the Thing. I cannot believe it. I need to go mainline this into my brain, into my imagination. It must live there now. Thank you for writing in with this letter, because my God, I'm very excited to know this. I can't believe Peter Watts wrote a sequel to the Thing. I can't believe it. Can't believe it. Fried Cheese Macaroni Ball says, cheap B movies had explosions, etc. No permits now. Well, look, the world has changed. The world is very different now. Making movies, you can't even point cameras in certain cities just down a main street, because a lot of the buildings are copywritten. The architecture is copywritten. Like you can't just go like shoot the Flatiron Building in New York City because you want to. If you want to, no, you have to license that. You have to go. You want to show the Griffith Park Observatory? Nope. You got to go get it approved. You can't. The world is just a very different place. People have really caught on. And yeah, you used to be able to blow shit up. Like if you were a low budget filmmaker, nobody paid any attention. Nowadays, even if you can't even be like, oh, we're just student filmmakers. Yeah, that doesn't fly. If I wanted to shoot on my sidewalk, if I brought a camera on my sidewalk and wanted to shoot action figures, and I was running a big camera on a tripod, if a cop drove by, he would stop, come out, and ask if I have a permit to shoot. The world is a different place now. I guess if you were like in, I don't know, some other state where they didn't know much about film production, like Wyoming, you could probably get away with a lot. You know, it's the least populous state in the country. Unless, of course, you wanted to shoot around Devil's Tower, that'd probably come out park rangers like, do you have a filming permit? But yes, cheap B movies used to be easier to make. Everything was easier. Now it's all expensive. Everybody wants some cheddar. You know what's really funny? Well, it's not really funny, but if you want to build part of the reason that you have such a problem with housing in Los Angeles, like you'd think, okay, we'll build low budget housing. Great. And when they approve low budget housing to be built, everybody gets a taste. Every different department, it's ridiculous. So one unit of low budget housing costs $500,000 to make. It's ridiculous. Until we get rid of all the graft and all that, we're never going to solve these problems. Same with low budget filmmaking. Although I really do believe in permits and things like that. I do. Sean E says, Rob, I'm a new fan. Please give me or us your honest opinion of The Last Jedi. Seemed strangely demeaning to lore and legacy characters. Luke, very woke, a poor sequel, and a poor business model. Thoughts? First of all, nice to have you here. Welcome, new subscriber. Thanks for supporting the channel. For the most part, I have to say that I enjoyed The Last Jedi upon first viewing. I thought the story of what happened with Luke becoming look, I didn't like Force Awakens. I didn't like the fact that Force Awakens is a movie that basically puts the galaxy right back to where it started at the beginning of the beginning of the first Star Wars movie. There's no difference. Instead of rebellion, there's a resistance, and instead of the Empire, there's the First Order, which to me was weird. I mean, as a as a Star Wars fan who read a lot of EU books, and I saw The Empire Strikes Back 26 times in the theater first run, it seemed stupid and lazy to open a new Star Wars movie with the galaxy in a state of disarray, and Luke Skywalker is missing. I mean, I thought it was I hated it, to be honest. I'm like, what? Especially if you'd followed the EU or played video games or read Dark Empire or the Thrawn trilogy or the Yuzon Vong. You know, if you knew anything about all of that stuff, to go back and to basically reset and to make a Star Wars movie where you just basically put things back to where they were in the first movie, I thought that was lame. I thought that was lame. So to me, anything that was doing anything different from just resetting and retelling it was Star Wars greatest hits, but badly, it was like watching a bad cover band. And it was like watching a bad cover band that thinks they're really good, which made it even worse. That's how I felt about Force Awakens. So The Last Jedi, I thought the story of Luke was interesting. I'm like, okay, I bought into that. I'm like, that makes sense to me. I'm his being disillusioned and what happened with it, because that would have been, but to me that would have been an interesting thing to see. All of the interesting stuff that was in, um, I mean, seeing the Knights of Ren or seeing Kylo Ren fall from grace or traveling around with Luke being a Padawan or whatever, that all of that stuff was more interesting to me. So seeing something that I found interesting like Luke's story, while I didn't think it necessarily besmirched his character, it was just interesting. It was different, but we didn't see any of that. I mean, it took till the second movie to get there. The Canto Bight stuff, I thought, well, that's I liked the idea that the rebels had been, or the resistance had been routed and they were trying to make their way to another base. And the idea, although it was pretty ridiculous, of this chase could have worked. You know, that could have been the last half of the film. And as I said before, if we met Rose and Finn and they were already in Canto Bight at the beginning, so we had that sort of 3-story structure going from the very beginning of the movie, and it was all converging into this chase, I think it could have worked. But I thought it was all over the place. I thought Last Jedi was all over the place. And again, there's no real through line. I thought the Kylo Ren Rey story was more interesting in Last Jedi, but there's so much in it that it lurches around. It goes from place to place. Whenever you go to Canto Bight, I'm like, why are we here? Is this really important to deal with right now? But I think Last Jedi is a flawed film. I don't hate it though. There's just a lot of stuff in it that I think is kind of dumb. Like, we've never dealt with the fact that Princess Leia is strong with the Force. Like, we've never seen that. And yet she gets blasted out of the bridge of a ship, and she's able to make herself survive being in zero gravity and being in an all vacuum environment without any kind of protection on, and she gets herself back all alive. I'm like, if you had established her as a powerful or a Force wielder, then maybe so. But that's like the first time you're watching Leia do anything with the Force, and it was silly. It was silly. And I don't like, I said this on Midnight's Edge yesterday, I don't like colloquial humor. One of the great things about the original Star Wars is that the humor was, first of all, I love character. All characters should be situational and character based. You should never have humor at the expense of your characters or the expense of your plot and story. As an example, I would say, things like Wookiees don't like to lose. You've never seen Wookiees pull a droid's arm out of their socket when they lose. Wookiees are known to do that. When Chewbacca sits back and puts his head behind, or his hands behind his head in Star Wars, that's funny. That's situational and character-based humor. That's funny. It tells you something. It shows you that Han and Chewie have a great bond. It shows you that Chewbacca has a sense of humor. And it tells more. It gives insight into those characters, and it's funny. And when Luke comes in and talks to Han Solo about Princess Leia, I don't know. What do you think of her? I try not to. Well, that's funny. And then Han, knowing, oh, Luke's given up the ghost, he's got a crush on Princess Leia. When Han says, I don't know, do you think a princess and a god? No. That's a great moment because it shows two men, those two characters communicating. It shows that Han recognizes Luke got a bit of a crush, and Han needles Luke. Han needles Luke and gets his goat. And it's all character-based, and that's the best kind of storytelling. Now, when you've got Poe Dameron telling modern jokes that put me on hold or whatever, I hate all of that because that's humor that's not going to age well, and it immediately takes you out of the film. I don't understand those kinds of jokes. To me, they don't belong in a galaxy far, far away. And there are things about Last Jedi that I didn't like, but I don't think it's a horrible movie. I think there's a lot of stuff going on in it that I like, and I like the look of a lot. I thought it was beautifully shot. There's a lot of interesting stuff, but I think the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, I think both Force Awakens and Last Jedi they don't know, because of what happened with Disney buying it was a Disney mandate that they made a Star Wars movie. Bob Iger talks about it. That was palatable for everybody. And that's what J.J. Abrams did. He went back and he basically played Star Wars greatest hits because that was his mandate. And I think a huge opportunity was lost. No pun intended. A huge opportunity was lost by not having a plan in place for all three films, because they should have known. They spent $4 billion. It's not like, I understand it was a risk. I get it. It was a huge risk and they had to mitigate those risks like Hollywood does. But if they had really crafted three stories that really knew where they were going, I think it could have been great. But I don't think that J.J. Abrams, again, he was a great hire on paper, but I don't think he was necessarily. They should have had a story group that it should have been workshopped. They should have had a writer's room come up with an arc. I mean, make it work. I don't know. But anyway, look, Last Jedi made over $1 billion. Nobody ever thought Star Wars was going to make $2 billion. Nobody, I don't care who you talk to, it was a fluke. And the fact that Last Jedi made over $1 billion it's hugely, monstrously successful. Can they say it's disappointing after Force Awakens? Sure they can, but nobody expected Force Awakens to make that much money. So the idea that a Star Wars movie is necessarily, there was nothing in the past that would have said Force Awakens would have made $2 billion. And this whole idea about, oh, the toys aren't selling the way they used to sell because, well, part of it is because the story that they're telling, why would you want those characters? You don't know anything about those characters. You don't know anything about the characters in Force Awakens either. They're not endeared. Those new characters, there's a lot of people that grow up with Rey, and that's their first experience with Star Wars, and I'm not going to take that away from them. But those characters don't resonate beyond because they don't do anything. I mean, Luke rescued the princess and blew up the Death Star. Luke's a hero. Luke accepted this mantle of responsibility. He went on, I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father. Then he meets Han Solo, the charming rogue who at the end comes back and helps Luke destroy the Death Star. I mean, these are characters that endure themselves over the course of that movie. But you're not endeared to any of those characters in Force Awakens. But I just think that and part of that is because you're watching characters that are copies of previous characters as opposed to being new characters all on their own. But anyway, that's, but I like Last Jedi. I didn't love Last Jedi, and I really was disappointed by Force Awakens, but I got what I expected, really. But I'm expecting, I want to love this trilogy. I really do. Speaking of Star Wars, this is from Luke Beckett. Hi, Rob, tell me something. What's the big fuss over Star Wars? And this comes from a person who grew up with Star Wars, has a degree in cinema, and for the most part, do enjoy the movies. When I was growing up in the early 80s, Star Wars was just a part of life. Everyone I knew had Star Wars toys. Everybody I knew would quote Star Wars. Because my name is Luke, people would constantly tell me to use the Force, and it hasn't stopped. Why couldn't George have called his hero Alphonse? Well, then you would have gotten Full Metal Alchemist jokes. Or maybe Rob. But then it slowly went away. After Return of the Jedi, the fandom survived for a while, but then it just faded. Oh, sure, you had the Ewok TV movies and the droids and the Ewok Saturday morning cartoons. You had the C-3PO breakfast cereal, but really, the greatness of it was gone. But then came the special editions, the prequels, and now Disney Star Wars. And it seems Star Wars is bigger than ever. But why? It seems to me not too many of the true fans enjoy them. The original Star Wars was a phenomenon, the likes of which I don't think has ever been surpassed. But when you really look at it, is it really that good? Now, you can look at me through the camera in amazement that I would even say such a thing all you want, but I am serious. The movie barely has a story. Leia puts the plans to the Death Star and R2-D2. He and C-3PO meet Luke. They go meet Ben. They go meet Han and Chewbacca. They save the princess, blow up the Death Star, and that's the movie. The movie has a better backstory, which is the premise for the prequels, than an actual story of its own, but that's okay. The world building, the groundbreaking special effects, and the amazing score by John Williams make up for the thin storyline. However, I really wonder if that movie was released today, it would have the same impact. I'm pretty sure it would not. If you ask the younger generation, they tend to think that movie to be a bit too simple by today's standards. At the time, nobody had ever seen such a movie, and that is what caused the phenomenon. But what makes it continue? People have been trying to recapture the magic of the original movie ever since, with varying degrees of success. The Empire Strikes Back is not just a great Star Wars movie, it's probably one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. I agree with you 100%. On the other hand, Return of the Jedi was a success, but also the first time fans started criticizing some of its choices, most notably with the Ewoks. You yourself were disappointed by it. The fans did not like the special editions, and they hated the prequels. The Force Awakens and Rogue One were great successes, but heavily criticized. Fans hated The Last Jedi, and finally, Solo flopped. So out of 10 movies in 42 years, or 13 if you count the special editions, there are only 2 movies, maybe 3, that everybody can agree on that were actually worth seeing. That is not a very good track record. Yet Star Wars fandom is probably the most fanatical in the world. No other franchise would have its producers painstakingly putting together a final film that they hope will satisfy everyone, in fear that if it does not, the world as they know it will end. No other franchise would have its fans spending hours dissecting and criticizing a movie trailer like they are doing with Episode 9. Incidentally, a movie trailer is just an elongated commercial. Do coffee drinkers dissect coffee ads? Maybe. Star Trek, James Bond, the MCU all have great fandom, but none of them have ever been as critical as Star Wars fans are. So what is so special about Star Wars? Now, I understand the nostalgia for people who did see the original movies in theaters, since they were unlike anything they'd seen before. But the continued passion for it, especially with new fans, is what is baffling. Since, like I have stated, most of the movies were not liked. So what is it? Luke Beckett. Luke, this is a college course right here, buddy. I have a theory, though. I have a theory about why does Star Wars endure and why do people love it? And remember, you're right. If you grew up in the 80s and 70s like I did, and you saw Star Wars and it blew your mind, and you played with the toys and all that, after Return of the Jedi was over, like you pointed out, there was cartoons, but Star Wars sort of went away. You know, it went away. And people always liked Star Wars. And if you think about it, there's a generation of people once Star Wars went away. I mean, think about what happened. Like in 85, Back to the Future came out. And things, pop culture changed, and there was a lot of stuff that was still coming out that was interesting, pop culture wise. I mean, not like Star Wars, but I think there were 2 things that happened with Star Wars, and to a certain extent Star Trek, but mostly Star Wars. It had to do with a couple of things. A lot of it has to do with the rise of the internet. And the same was true. Rick Berman, I famously told me, Rick Berman, when we were doing the Star Trek, the Next Generation documentaries, he even says in our documentaries, when we first interviewed Rick Berman, he says the internet, he always thought of to himself that the rise of the internet was caused by 2 things: pornography and Star Trek. Because when the internet began its meteoric rise to change humanity forever, people were exchanging porn, and they were talking about Star Trek on the internet. Because Star Trek fans, the technology and all that, were immediately jumped online and wanted to swap out or swap their knowledge. But I think in the 90s, as the internet grew to prominence and people had email and then the World Wide Web developed, I think that there's a whole group of people, especially younger people, that grew up with home video. Remember, when Star Wars came out in 77, there was no home video. Then, of course, Empire came out in 1980, where home video was just the seed had planted, and it was exploding across the internet. It was exploding across culture. There was no internet then. And Return of the Jedi, all 3 of these movies were a big part of the early adopter, the video generation, and people watched these movies forever, but then it peaked, it went away. But what happened was there was a new generation, I would call them second wave fans that grew up in a world where home video existed. And there was all kinds of other things, other kinds of entertainment. Anime was being seen, video games. Remember, the video games that we got when Star Wars came out, not so good. The technology for video games were not so good. In the 90s, however, with our second wave fans, video games, the technology, you went from 8-bit to 16-bit. You went from Intellivision, which was an 8-bit game. Then you got Nintendo. And then eventually we had all kinds of different, whether it was Sega or Dreamcast or it was video games, and then computer games as well, PC games. And there was a lot of Star Wars games because they lent themselves, whether it was TIE Fighter or X-Wing or whatever. We saw Star Wars games proliferating. People were playing those things. Home entertainment, again, burgeoning. And you had a bunch of things happening. And then there was the rise of the internet. All of these things, this confluence of things, and the fact that they were slowly injecting Star Wars back into pop culture, first with the Thrawn novels and the Dark Empire comics, but then with toys and action figures again, leading up. I mean, Star Wars was being systematically reintroduced to pop culture across many different mediums that didn't exist back in the day, but they did exist in the 90s for second wave fans. And it all became a universe, and this is my biggest theory. This is I'm leading up to what I think. And it's not a revelatory theory to me, but people want to live, people want to be a part of the Star Wars universe. It just looks, and it's a cool place to be. All of the lore, I mean, suddenly you're talking about the Knights of the Old Republic and all of the stuff. And I think video games are a big part of it because there was a lot of Star Wars storytelling, not just in the EU, but there was a lot of Star Wars storytelling in the video games that expanded the mythology. I mean, hell, man, I love on my N64, bro, Shadows of the Empire. That game was dope. It was so much fun. I love that game. They had new Corellian ship, the Outrider. And so the Star Wars universe was greatly expanded. And it was just a place we wanted to hang out, whether we were watching a movie, whether we were reading a book, whether we were playing a video game, whether we were reading comics, whether we were playing with toys. The Star Wars universe became a place to reside in on many different levels. And that's what happened with Star Wars, is it became much bigger than simply, we had 3 movies, but now when you were playing Shadows of the Empire, which it was canonical or loosely, it was not loosely, but it was part of canon. And you were playing that game, suddenly the Star Wars, was Shadows of the Empire any less credible? I mean, sure, it wasn't a movie, but it was a pretty great game. And it was really satisfying to play. And you're waiting, well, when is the next Star Wars game going to come out? I think that universe became something that worked for a lot of different people across many different mediums. And that's why people dug it. And by the time you got to the special editions, man, Star Wars was back, and it just fueled more of that. And then people grew up with the universe. I mean, it's interesting because the Burnett axiom, never put your universe before your characters and your story. Well, what was happening was this universe was being built across. It truly was, everyone wanted a transmedia property. Star Wars was definitely a transmedia property. And they didn't know what that was yet, but they were doing things that suddenly, people grew up with this universe and they loved this universe. And the second wave fans, because there was so much more Star Wars coming at you all the time, whether it was video games or whether it was other things, and then the movies, and it became much more a part of youth. Like, you grew up playing Star Wars video games, and so it wasn't just the movies anymore. Star Wars worked on many different platforms, and I think now we're at a place where second wave fans, the people that weren't there when Star Wars came out originally, literally have grown up with this universe that they love so much that it's hard to accept, because once you go back and you look at Star Wars and Empire and Jedi, they're always satisfying. As much as I don't like Jedi, there's people that saw Jedi for the first time. John Campbell, Jedi is his favorite Star Wars movie, which I totally understand. People who came to it later, I get it. But that's why I think it was just a part of culture, especially genre culture. And what was interesting, as the internet rose and video games became exponentially better than they used to be, You know, it wasn't just a ball that was swinging a stick that was supposed to be a lightsaber. I mean, you're now playing close to photorealistic games, and look where we are now with Battlefront 2 or Fallen Order that's coming out. I mean, amazing stuff that we're getting, and it's just as much a part of Star Wars as anything else. And the idea that we're getting movies now that disappoint is, I think it drives people crazy, because they're like, why is this? What? You know, we're getting these incredible videos. How do you not spend the time doing this and making it good? So I think that's kind of what has happened, is that the Star Wars universe, and people want to live there. They want to hang out. They want to spend their time in the Star Wars universe. They do. But, you know, at least that's what I would think. But that's a good question, Luke. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I off base? Am I wrong? I could be wrong. This is a good letter. This letter comes from Rick Berg. Rick Berg says, "Hey, everyone. Thought I would take a few and bring up an important subject. As the debate rages on about all in the singularity, I wanted to point out that as we forge forward, that everyone should also turn around once in a while and see where we came from and ponder just how far we've come. So I have put together a family tree, as it were. The Burnettwork's beehive, B meaning the Big Bang, the beginning of our universe that we now believe in. The Burnettwork's beehive. Now here's a list. I'm going to give you this list that that Rick has put down of essential films that you need to see to understand the Post-Geek Singularity community. I have to say, this is a very fine list. I have a few to add, but I'm going to read it. 25 movies here. 24, actually. The Thing from Another World from 1951. 1953's War of the Worlds. 1953's This Island Earth. 1958's It, The Terror from Beyond Space. 1951's When Worlds Collide. 1957's The Monolith Monsters. 1956's Forbidden Planet. 1958's The Blob. 1954's Them. 1953, It Came from Outer Space. 1950's Rocket Ship XM. 1959's Journey to the Center of the Earth. 1950's Destination Moon. 1965's Crack in the World. 1952's Red Planet Mars. 1966's Fantastic Voyage. 1974's Dark Star. 1961's Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. 1954's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. 1961's Mysterious Island. 1960's The Time Machine. 1957's The Incredible Shrinking Man. 1953's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. And 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still. Well, that's a good start. Please add to the hive as we go. With respect, Rick Berg, steady as she goes. Well, Rick, dude, bruh, you did say John Carpenter's Dark Star, so you took us all the way up to 1974. Now, I understand you're probably thinking about the lesser movies here, but you cannot go up to 1974 without you're missing some really important movies. Now, I'm going to say you don't have 2001 in here. You don't have all 5 Planet of the Apes movies from here. You don't have Colossus the Forbin Project. You don't have Silent Running in here. You don't have A Clockwork Orange in there. You don't have movies like A Boy and His Dog in there. You don't have Angry Red Planet, which is a movie I loved as a kid only because it's got a really cool giant monster on the surface of Mars. Conquest of Space is not here, which goes with War of the Worlds and When Worlds Collide. Hell, Zardoz. Put in Zardoz. Why not throw in Zardoz? Come on, man. There's a lot. You know, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. ZPG, Zero Population Growth, with Oliver Reed. I know there's so many here. This is a good list. It is a great foundational list. But I bet I could come up with more. But it's a good list to start. And I want to thank you for sending it in. It's a very thoughtful list. But I like the idea of having a Burnettwork beehive. I guess that's what you mean. It's B movies. You're saying B movies. I get it. But you know, like ZPG is kind of a B movie. I guess Zardoz wouldn't be a B movie. Clockwork Orange wouldn't be a B movie. But the beehive, I like that. The Burnettwork beehive. Yeah, someone's got to do a logo. The Burnettwork beehive of B movies. But, you know, even if it's B movies, you can't say that Rocket Ship XM or Destination Moon, because they're not, they might seem like B movies. That's Fantastic Voyage, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. These weren't B movies. But I do like the idea of the Burnettwork beehive. It's interesting. Hell, for this Halloween season, here's a movie that I bet a lot of you haven't seen that I would wholeheartedly recommend, and you're going to laugh when I say it. Invasion of the Bee Girls. If you haven't seen Invasion of the Bee Girls, I'm telling you, it's you should watch it. Invasion of the Bee Girls. It's a movie that I think you would all love. It really, would it surprise you, over or under, that Rob Burnett has Invasion of the Bee Girls on Blu-ray? Over or under 60%. You know it's 100%. I have it. Willow Yang says, now that you mention it, why do Luke and Leia have such normal Earth names when most other characters have wacky, exotic alien ones? Okay, see, here's the thing. This way lies madness. I've just assumed, here's the assumption that I make with all, that's Zoe, by the way, with all science fiction, fantasy, and horror films. And I think, actually, mostly science fiction movies that are, they don't really speak English. None of the names that we're hearing, they don't, whether it's the Republic Basic, Arabesh, whatever they speak, I don't know what you're going to call it. None of it sounds remotely like English. I just go with that. But because I'm on Earth watching a movie that was made here, I just have to assume, like you brought up Elian Sleazebagano, selling death sticks in Attack of the Clones, whatever you want to call it. I mean, Dexter, Jetster, all of the names. I overlook all of that because that way lies madness. Why does everybody speak English, even with universal translators on Star Trek? It's just a conceit that I'm willing to overlook. But I think it's an interesting question. Why Darth Vader, all the word, Grand Moff, Sheev Palpatine. Sheev's kind of a cool name. I wish my name was Sheev. When I was a kid, I'd love to be named Sheev. Who knows? It's a good question, but it's one. Willie, you got to overlook it. You got to overlook it. Otherwise, you'll go crazy. Timo James is here. Says, please check out this glorious tune inspired by Jessica Jonathan Yanov, a parody of the song Hallelujah, Smells Like Manure, on Pork Sirloin's channel. Share the love. Love your work. You really want everybody to listen to a parody of the song Hallelujah? Smells like manure. Okay. First of all, thanks for supporting the channel. And who is to say that we shouldn't listen to a great parody song? But sounds good to me. So for everybody, Tumo, is it Timo or Tumo James says, please check out the glorious tune inspired by Jessica and Jonathan Yanov, a parody of the song Hallelujah, Smells Like Manure, on Pork Sirloin's channel. Share the love. Well, you sent me a super chat. I'm happy to share that love. Thank you for supporting the channel. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings this episode 261 of Robservations, the show about something, to an end. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel. I want to thank my moderators, of which we have new ones. We got Louis Yu, we got Jordy. I like to say Jordy 54, but why not? We've got, of course, Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham. We've got Detective Jim. We got Greg Smith. We've got, of course, hopefully the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, who's fighting for his life in his mayoral race. Let's wish him well. Let's wish him luck. He's going to come back. So everybody, thank you for sending in letters. Please go to the Burnettwork.net and send me letters at the website. I'm still backed up. I'm trying to go through them. I'm trying to get through them, but you guys send me such interesting letters. It's hard to get through them quickly, but go to the Burnettwork. If you like these chats, please subscribe, please like, please share with your friends, please comment on YouTube. The analytics, as Gary Beekler would say, whether you do like me or your favorite YouTuber, maybe they're not me, but whomever, it's always good when these channels can get support. And I really appreciate everybody's support. We're growing the Post-Geek Singularity community. Please join the Facebook page. You can go and get on the Facebook page, the Post-Geek Singularity community Facebook page. And I always like interacting there too. It's a lot of fun. And yeah. So I will be back tomorrow, as you all know. And hopefully I will be seeing you here again. Yeah. Star Wars. Now I'm going to be plagued about, as if I haven't thought about Star Wars enough in the last 42 years. Jeez. Anyway, I'm still going to think about Star Wars. And remember, we're getting 7 weeks of Star Wars beginning on the 12th of November. And I'm pretty excited about that because November begins on Friday. Wow, Friday is November 1st, ladies and gentlemen. We're getting into the holiday season, and we're getting into the 7 weeks of Star Wars, which is pretty incredible. Anyway, I want to thank you all, and remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I bid you all farewell. Robservations 261, the show about something, comes to a close. And as always, have a better day.